We begin with some breaking news. South Korea's ex-president Yoon Suk Yeol has been sentenced to life in prison on charges of insurrection for declaring military rule in December 2024. A judge said Yoon was guilty of rebellion for mobilizing military forces in an illegal attempt to seize the legislature, arrest politicians, and establish unchecked power. In December 2024, he ordered soldiers to storm parliament and sent troops onto the streets. Yoon's martial law declaration lasted just 6 hours, but plunged South Korea into its biggest political crisis in decades. Let's cross over to journalist Fabian Kretschmer. He's in Seoul covering this case. Fabian, what more can you tell us about the verdict?
Well, the main point of the verdict was that Yoon Suk Yeol was found guilty of leading an insurrection by declaring martial law and also by sending military troops to the National Assembly. He tried to paralyze the National Assembly and undermine the democratic order, according to the judge. So it is a grave verdict, but however, the judge did reject several claims that the prosecutor made. The prosecutor said that Yoon Suk Yeol planned this martial law decree for over a year and that he wanted to plan a long-term dictatorship. And this, the judge said, is not the case. And that's why Yoon Suk Yeol, quote-unquote, only received a lifelong prison sentence because the prosecutor demanded a death sentence. That was also a possibility. However, it would have been a symbolic choice because in South Korea, within the last 30 years, no death penalty has ever been executed. But yeah, it's a grave verdict, and Yoon Suk Yeol will probably spend several years behind bars.
Was this ruling widely expected?
I would say it was widely expected. Why? Because there were already several other high-ranking politicians under Yoon Suk Yeol's former government who have already been sentenced to lengthy prison terms. For example, former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, he was sentenced to 23 years of prison for aiding Yoon Suk Yeol in this martial law attempt. So we already knew that basically the court assessed the martial law attempt as an insurrection. And you know, when he was found guilty of insurrection, then there were only a few options left. And those options included a lifelong prison sentence with labor, lifelong prison sentence without labor, and the death sentence. So there were actually not too many options.
And so is this sentence with or without labor, Fabian?
Well, so actually, the sentence means that, a lifelong sentence doesn't mean that he will spend all the rest of his life behind bars. We know that there were several, actually including Yoon, 5 former South Korean presidents who have been sentenced to lengthy prison terms or even the death sentence within the last 30 years, and all of them have been pardoned. Several have been pardoned after 5 years. One even only spent 2 years behind bars, so we don't know. In the end, it's a political decision whether and when Yoon Suk Yeol will be pardoned, but that's definitely a possibility that could happen in the coming years.
How are South Koreans reacting to this verdict then?
Well, you could see outside the court that there were a lot of pro-Yoon supporters. They reacted with both anger and sadness. So some have shed tears over the verdict. Others were, there were some minor clashes among angry protesters with media, also with the police. But overall, so far, it has remained peaceful. And I think that's really the strength of South Korean democracy. It is highly polarized, but and the democracy was really heavily tested within the last 1.5 years, but major escalations, major violence has really has not happened. So far, it has remained peaceful, and I hope this will also stay like this.
Fabian, thank you very much. That was journalist Fabian Kretschmer in Seoul.